"I don't have personal history anymore," he said, and looked at me probingly. "I dropped it one day, when I felt it was no longer necessary." I stared at him, trying to detect the hidden meanings of his words. "How can one drop one's personal history?" I asked in an argumentative mood. "One must first have the desire to drop it," he said, "and then one must proceed harmoniously to chop it off, little by little." "Why should anyone have such a desire?" I exclaimed. I had a terribly strong attachment to my personal history. My family roots were deep. I honestly felt that without them, my life had no continuity or purpose. "Perhaps you should tell me what you mean by dropping one's personal history," I said. "To do away with it, that's what I mean," he replied cuttingly. I insisted that I mustn't have understood the proposition. "Take you, for instance," I said. "You are a Yaqui. You can't change that." "Am I?" he asked, smiling. "How do you know that?" "True," I said. "I can't know that with certainty at this point, but you know it. And that's what counts. That's what makes it personal history." I felt I'd driven a hard nail in. "The fact that I know whether I'm a Yaqui or not doesn't make it personal history," he replied. "Only when someone else knows that does it become personal history, and I assure you that no one will ever know that for sure." I'd written down what he'd said in a clumsy way. I stopped writing and looked at him. I couldn't figure him out. I mentally ran through my impressions of him. The mysterious and unprecedented way he'd looked at me during our first meeting, the charm with which he'd claimed that he received agreement from everything around him, his annoying humor and his alertness, his look of bona fide stupidity when I asked about his father and mother, and then the unsuspected force of his statements which had snapped me apart. "You don't know what I am, do you?" he said, as if he were reading my thoughts. "You will never know who or what I am, because I don't have a personal history." He asked me if I had a father. I told him I did. He said that my father was an example of what he had in mind. He urged me to remember what my father thought of me. "Your father knows everything about you," he said. "So he has you all figured out. He knows who you are and what you do, and there's no power on earth that can make him change his mind about you." Don Juan said that everybody that knew me had an idea about me, and that I kept feeding the idea with everything I did. "Don't you see?" he asked dramatically. "You must renew your personal history by telling your parents, your relatives, and your friends everything you do. On the other hand, if you have no personal history, no explanations are needed. Nobody is angry or disillusioned with your acts, and above all, no one pins you down with their thoughts." Suddenly, the idea became clear in my mind. I'd almost known it myself, but I'd never examined it. Not having personal history was indeed an appealing concept, at least on the intellectual level. It gave me, however, a sense of loneliness which I found threatening and distasteful. I wanted to discuss my feelings with him, but I kept myself in check. Something was terribly incongruous in the situation at hand. I felt ridiculous trying to get into a philosophical argument with an old Indian who obviously didn't have the sophistication of a university student. Somehow, he had led me away from my original intention of asking him about his genealogy. I don't know how we ended up talking about this, when all I wanted was some names for my charts, I said, trying to steer the conversation back to the topic I wanted.